Have you ever have you ever felt like the world actively wants you to stay in this sort of state of suspended animation?
Oh, like a permanent holding pattern.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's this invisible systemic pressure pushing you to avoid real responsibility, to, you know, consume, stay quiet, and never truly grow up.
Right. It's this very profound sort of modern alienation. You look around and realize the traditional markers of maturity, they just seem to have completely vanished.
And society almost punishes you for wanting them back. Which brings us to what we're looking at today. Welcome to a brand new deep dive.
And this one is intense.
It really is. Today, we're exploring the mind of someone who believes society literally fixed the world so no one ever has to grow up.
Yeah.
We are going to walk through his radical, honestly heartbreaking rebellion against that system.
Yeah, the source material we have today is raw. It's highly philosophical and just unflinchingly personal.
Right. We're analyzing an extensive dialogue and a set of reflections written by a 57-year-old man. He was born in 1968. And to give you an idea of the scope here, these sources span cultural critique, quantum physics, theology, and some really intense personal grief.
It's a staggering synthesis,
Yeah.
honestly. What we have is the detailed, meticulously constructed worldview of an individual trying to make sense of his place in a universe that he feels has actively worked to infantilize him at
Right.
every single turn.
Exactly. And our mission today is to analyze this profound tension between personal autonomy and those systemic pressures.
Right.
Because usually, when we talk about trying to understand someone's pain or their worldview, we look for a medical or psychological diagnosis.
So we want a neat little label.
Right. There's this expectation of precision, like
Yeah.
engineering.
Yeah.
You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is, that's the fracture.
It's binary. It's either broken or not broken. We like things to be visible and easily categorized because, well, it offers a clear path to a solution.
But then you step into the world of his author, into neurodevelopment, existential framing, deep psychological trauma, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just totally useless.
Yeah. The diagnostic landscape here is murky, to put it mildly.
Very mildly. We are going to explore how this individual fought for his own adulthood and how he used everything from the socioeconomic shifts of the 1960s to literally the Higgs field in quantum mechanics to reclaim his agency.
It's quite the journey.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand this individual's fight, we really have to start at his beginning, the exact cultural hinge point of his birth,
Right, the year 1968.
1968.
You really can't separate his worldview from that specific date. He views his birth year as the precise moment the baby boomer generation fundamentally dismantled the traditional markers of adulthood.
So he was born right into the wreckage of the sexual revolution.
Exactly. And he views that not as a period of liberation, which is how it's usually taught, but as a period of profound structural theft.
I want to dig into the mechanics of that theft. Because when you or I or anyone listening hears 1968 or the sexual revolution, the cultural narrative is almost always about freedom.
Throwing off oppressive norms.
Right, throwing off puritanical rules. But from his perspective, this wasn't liberation at all. This was the decoupling of sex from long-term obligation and reproduction, which effectively reframed maturity as something entirely optional.
Think about what adulthood meant prior to that era. It was largely defined by external scaffolds. You had early marriage, early reproduction, clear vocational tracks, visible intergenerational obligation.
We had to step up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your status as an adult was conferred by the responsibilities you took on. But the author argues that the society that conceived him participated in the largest deliberate unmooring of those traditional markers in centuries.
So the baby boomers, in his eyes, they wanted the perks of adulthood, specifically sexual access and social influence, without the heavy restrictive scaffolding of duty.
That's his exact argument. They took the rewards and threw away the responsibilities.
Let me try to put this into a concrete analogy for you listening. It's like, imagine studying your whole life for a final exam to earn your diploma. You put in the late nights, you follow all the rules, you sacrifice your free time.
You do everything you're supposed to do.
Right. Only to arrive at the school on test day and find that the teachers have completely burned the building down, set up a music festival in the ashes, and declared that grades just don't matter anymore.
And not only do grades not matter, but the students who never studied a day in their lives are now the ones running the school. And they're mocking you for bringing a pencil.
Wow. Yeah, that really paints the picture.
That is the exact mechanism of his frustration. He calls it a cosmic bait and switch. He felt he was preparing for this serious adult life, looking forward to the rites of passage that confer maturity. But he arrived to find that the very concept of an earned adulthood had just been erased by the culture.
The phrase cosmic bait and switch, I mean, that implies a broken promise. And for him, reading through the source material, this wasn't just a social contract, it was a deeply moral and spiritual covenant.
Yes, very much so. He viewed abstaining from the sexual chaos of the culture around him as a literal contract with God.
The terms were pretty clear in his head, right?
Very clear.
Oh.
He felt that if he voluntarily refused to participate in what he saw as the vile, irresponsible act of recreational sex, which, by the way, he famously, in rather bluntly terms, masturbating with a partner.
Yeah, that's a harsh phrasing.
It is. But he felt if he abstained from that, God would eventually grant him a wife. And that wife, that marriage, would in turn allow him to achieve true, recognized adulthood.
He was preserving himself for the traditional structure.
Exactly. But I'm looking at the timeline of his life in these sources, and he's looking around in his 20s and 30s, and the people who are breaking the rules are winning the game.
They were thriving. The cultural tone was being set by people he categorized as lazy hippies.
Men who avoided manual labor, avoided traditional responsibility, yet they were the ones getting the romantic partners, the cultural validation, and the freedom.
The culture was actively rewarding the avoidance of duty.
Yeah. And I see the logic of his anger, I really do. But isn't there an element of, well, I don't want to say jealousy, but a kind of bitter realization that he played a game no one else was playing?
He specifically points out that these hippies didn't even look like rebels to him anymore. They looked like this establishment.
Because they were the establishment. By the time he came of age in the 1980s and 90s, the counterculture of the 60s had become the dominant culture. They dictated the norms.
And the underlying message of those norms, at least as he received it, was basically, hey, we already broke the rules and grew up for you, so you don't ever have to. In fact, we'd really prefer if you didn't.
Right. He perceived this as a theft of his right to become a full human being. He felt society had come to actively fetishize immaturity.
He actually maps out this timeline in his head, and it's fascinating how rigid it is. He says before 1968, you're not allowed to sin. From 1968 to 1986, you're not allowed to sin until you grow up.
And after 1996, you're not allowed to grow up at all.
It's so bleak. That timeline illustrates the collapsing moral frame he experienced. He was constantly waiting for the moment he would be allowed to enter adulthood, only to find the goalposts moved every single time he got close.
And we really have to recognize the psychological toll here. It wasn't just frustration about dating or culture. It was a feeling of profound, structural humiliation.
Which leads us right into a part of his philosophy that is going to be incredibly jarring for a lot of people.
Oh.
Because this feeling of a rigged, humiliating system didn't just apply to the culture of the late 60s.
No, it goes much deeper.
He extrapolates it to the biological reality of human existence itself. It leads him to this radical anti-natalist stance on childhood.
Yes, he is adamantly child-free. He views the entire foundational concept of childhood as an inherently humiliating experience.
Not just difficult, but humiliating.
Exactly. It's not just that childhood is hard, it's that the structure of it is an affront to human dignity.
Now, if you're a parent listening to this right now, your blood pressure is probably spiking. I get it. It's an incredibly offensive concept on its face. We are wired to view childhood as magical, or at least a necessary, beautiful phase of development.
It's how our species survives, obviously.
Right. But put your defensiveness aside for a second and look at the power dynamics he's pointing at. He calls childhood an 18 years to life prison sentence because your parents got laid.
It is a brutal metaphor. But it forces you to look at the structural asymmetry of a parent-child relationship. To him, a child is a human who is existentially owned.
Owned by biology.
Yeah. They're reduced to a subordinate object of someone else's biology. They didn't ask to be here, yet they are subjected to total, inescapable dependency.
It's like viewing the concept of a gift, the gift of life, as a mandatory debt you never asked to take on, but you are forced to repay it through 18 years of submission.
That's a great way to put it. And the sources connect his feelings here to several established thinkers in the anti-natalist space to show that while extreme, this is a coherent philosophical position.
It's not just him ranting in a vacuum.
Right. For example, the philosopher Julio Cabrera, he argues that procreation is inherently manipulative. The parent unilaterally imposes existence and total dependence onto a being who has absolutely no say in the matter.
The child starts life as a project for the parents, not as an equal consciousness.
Exactly. And he also mentions David Benatar, right?
Yes, Benatar makes the controversial case that coming into existence is always a net harm. His argument hinges on the idea that the dependency, vulnerability, and inevitable suffering of childhood are part of an unconsented package.
You're drafted into existence.
Yes. And there's also the Polish educator Janusz Korczak, who wrote extensively about the searing humiliation of childhood.
The physical smallness of it.
The physical smallness, the constant dismissal by adults, the daily shame of needing permission for basic bodily autonomy and dignity, just asking to use the restroom.
Right. What makes this author's version of this philosophy so piercing, though, is that it isn't just an academic exercise. He didn't just read Benatar and decide to be child-free.
He lived it.
He experienced this humiliation viscerally in his own life, specifically through his relationship with his mother.
Yeah, the sources detail a deeply painful dynamic there. His parents divorced in 1984 when he was a teenager, and he describes watching his mother, who he acknowledges loved him and cared for him, repeatedly seek out romantic relationships with unemployed, low-status men.
Men he categorized as the hippie or redneck archetypes that he so deeply despised.
I really want to pause on the psychology of that, because think about the causality here for a kid who is already feeling like collateral damage from a culture that celebrates irresponsibility.
The mother is essentially the God figure in the childhood power hierarchy.
Exactly. So if your God chooses to shower affection and validation on men you view as entirely worthless, what does that do to your own sense of worth?
It creates a devastating psychic whiplash. The author reasons if she can love down that far, if she can validate men who completely refuse to take on adult responsibility, then her love for me doesn't elevate my dignity.
It just validates your lowliness.
Right. It proves that I am just a pet to her.
He actually felt she was actively embarrassed by his desire to grow up. Like his desire for maturity, for a conservative adult appearance, challenged the very lifestyle and the very men she was attracted to.
His pursuit of adulthood threatened her script. In her narrative, he was supposed to stay the dependent proof of her maternal love, while she pursued chaotic romantic validation elsewhere.
And this fundamental biological betrayal, this feeling that flesh and blood relationships are just engines for humiliation, it leads him to an incredible protest vote.
Oh, the AI comment.
Yes, he states he would rather have his head blown off by a superintelligent robot than be infantilized by living flesh and blood.
Embracing AI to escape human biology. I mean, that is just wild.
He's looking at potential extinction by a machine and saying, at least the machine won't treat me like a child.
He views artificial intelligence as the ultimate escape hatch from the mammal trap. Because think about what AI is. It's intelligence without the wetware baggage of sex, status, reproduction, and succession.
No inherited trauma.
Right. A superintelligent machine has no womb, no daddy issues, no inherited generational grudges. For him, being eliminated by an efficient, impersonal machine is entirely preferable to the lifelong emotional mortgage and humiliation of organic, dependent existence.
So he's trapped in this biological and cultural framework where he feels entirely disposable and humiliated. But the systemic pressures don't stop at childhood or dating. The socioeconomic reality of post-1960s America mirrors this exact same power imbalance.
He maps it perfectly onto the economy.
He connects the biological unfairness of sex directly to the economic unfairness of the modern world.
We really need to examine his view on systemic power carefully. Looking at the mechanisms he describes, he observes a system of hypergamy and social reward that he feels is fundamentally exploitative.
So what's his core argument there?
His argument is that the modern system expects working-class men to stay alive simply to perform soul-crushing labor, what he explicitly calls economic slavery.
Let's trace the causality there. Why economic slavery? He's looking at the shift from an industrial manufacturing economy to an administrative service-based economy.
Right.
In the past, hard manual labor broke your body, sure, but it conferred a certain undeniable status as a provider. It earned you that adulthood.
You had a place in the community.
Exactly. But he argues that in the post-60s world, poor working-class men were crucified by manual labor and the Vietnam draft, while wealthy elites hid in universities, adopted the hippie persona, and gained all the sexual and social access without doing the hard work that actually sustained society.
It's the ultimate systemic hypocrisy in his eyes. The culture mocks the physical laborer, portrays him as backwards or uncultured, while simultaneously demanding his labor to keep the lights on and the infrastructure running.
Someone has to pave the roads.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the romantic and social rewards flow upward to what he calls unproductive men of means. the men who bypassed the crucifixion of hard labor entirely.
It's like being forced to be the engine of a luxury cruise ship. You are down in the dark, sweltering engine room. You are providing the power, the labor, the forward momentum that keeps the entire vessel afloat.
But you are locked behind a steel door.
Locked down there, while everyone else is up on the Lido deck, drinking champagne, listening to the band, and occasionally shouting down the intercom to tell you that you're toxic for complaining about the heat.
And if you do complain, the passengers on the deck tell you that you should be grateful the ship is moving at all.
It's infuriating when you look at it through his lens.
And this feeling of being a disposable utility, it reached its absolute peak for him with the passage of the Affordable Care Act mandate.
Now, this is a fascinating point in the sources. Why would a healthcare policy trigger an existential crisis?
Because of how he interpreted the mechanism of the mandate. He didn't see it as a safety net, not at all. He explicitly states he felt forced to buy health insurance under the threat of financial penalty just to stay alive, to do work that made him want to die.
Wow.
It wasn't about his well-being. It was the state ensuring its biological machinery, meaning him, didn't break down before it could extract maximum labor.
That is a staggering level of despair. He felt the system didn't view him as a human life to be enriched or protected, but literally as a unit of energy to be built, managed, and kept functional solely to serve the elites on the deck of the cruise ship.
And he conceptualizes the architect of this system as a specific theological entity. He calls it the hippie prison guard god.
The hippie prison guard god. Break that down because it's a very specific, almost bizarre image.
It's a brilliant, highly cynical theological concept. This isn't the authoritarian, fire and brimstone dictator god of the Old Testament. This is a smug, passive-aggressive deity.
A god with good vibes, but cruel intentions.
Exactly. A god that demands moral license without consequences for his favorite class. The elites, the hippies, the people who avoid duty. But for people like the author, this god acts as a prison guard, abandoning him in moral no man's land, holding the bag of responsibility, forcing him to work, and mocking him for wanting honor in return.
He's describing a culture that demands you to be a provider, but shames you for caring about traditional providing. A culture that says, you know, all you need is love and vibes, while he felt he desperately needed purpose, clarity, and a recognized place in the hierarchy.
He feels that women are, in his words, crucified by the biological demands of children, while men are crucified by the economic demands of their jobs.
And the tragedy is that the modern world, under this hippie prison god, tries to pretend neither crucifixion is happening, leaving everyone isolated in their suffering.
It's a very lonely worldview.
Extremely. So if you truly believe the system only values your labor as a disposable utility, and the universe only values your biology to perpetuate a humiliating cycle of childhood, checking out almost seems like the logical conclusion of his philosophy.
It does.
What stops him? How does one find agency in a world that demands your labor but totally denies your dignity?
For this author, the answer came through profound personal tragedy and the grueling, transformative crucible of caregiving. His life became entirely defined by caring for two women in wheelchairs.
We mentioned his mother earlier. She suffered from multiple sclerosis for 22 years. He was heavily involved in her care until she ultimately died of a C. diff infection in a hospital in 2016.
Right. But the other woman was his wife, Dawn. Dawn was born the same year as him, 1968. She had a severe form of osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bone disease. She stood exactly 3 feet 6 inches tall, and she was entirely wheelchair-bound. Pregnancy would have been a lethal event for her.
They met in 2005, right, when they were both 36 years old.
Yes. So his philosophy of being child-free, which he had justified through antinatalism and his hatred of childhood humiliation, was now handed to him as an unavoidable physical and medical reality.
Choice was made for him.
Exactly. And the dichotomy between his caregiving for his mother and his caregiving for his wife is the absolute emotional core of these sources.
Yeah.
His mother loved him, but as we established, her love often felt like it required his infantilization.
Right, she needed him to stay a dependent child in her narrative.
But Dawn, however, was fundamentally different. She validated his adulthood.
She recognized him. She didn't just love him as a caregiver. She saw him as a man, as an equal, as a protector.
And think about the daily mechanics of caring for someone with osteogenesis imperfecta. Because of her extreme physical vulnerability, the literal physical acts of her care strongly resembled raising a child.
Lifting, bathing, managing fragile limbs.
Yes. But because she was a fully actualized, fiercely intelligent adult who respected him, he was able to take on this profound, heavy responsibility without inflicting the structural humiliation of childhood upon someone.
It's as if he found a loophole in the universe's cruel biology. He despised the power imbalance of childhood. He despised the idea of forcing existence onto a being that didn't ask for it.
But he still needed the weight.
Right. He desperately, fundamentally craved the heavy responsibility, the weight of adulthood that typically comes with raising a family. By choosing to bear the immense physical and emotional burden of care for Dawn, he seized the adulthood the world tried to deny him, and he did it without violating his own moral code.
It is a deeply poetic instinct. His growth wasn't an optional journey of self-discovery or a cultural performance. It was demanded by the physical fragility of the woman he loved.
It was forced into existence.
In the fire of that sacrificial daily caregiving, he finally achieved the undeniable adulthood he had been seeking since he realized the cultural rules changed in 1968.
He actually mentions a specific moment regarding that ACA healthcare mandate we talked about earlier. He hated the mandate. He hated being forced to stay alive just to do soul-crushing work.
But it shifted.
It did. He had this realization that he had to stay alive despite the policy, simply because he had to be there to lift Dawn. If his heart stopped, she was defenseless. Love, not state policy, redeemed his existence.
It gave him a reason to care about his own survival. He became the load-bearing pillar for her life. But then, the universe delivered an incomprehensible, chaotic blow.
June 19th, 2018.
Just over 2 years after his mother passed away after her 22-year battle with MS, Dawn was killed instantly when an SUV hit her at the intersection of Kanawha and High Street.
No slow decline, no medical warning. Just random, violent, chaotic tragedy tearing his universe completely apart.
The suddenness of it devastated him on a level that is just hard to articulate. But what is crucial to understand is that the aftermath was, in some ways, just as psychologically destructive as the loss itself.
How so?
Because without Dawn, without the physical, undeniable proof of his responsibility, the world immediately reverted to infantilizing him.
Oh, man. He writes that society wanted to, quote, shove him back in his dead mother's womb.
It is a visceral, horrifying image. He felt that his hard-earned, sacrificial masculinity, the physical and emotional strength he built specifically to lift, carry, and protect Dawn, it terrified the people around him.
They didn't know what to do with it.
We live in a culture addicted to comfort and youth, a culture that actively avoids the reality of suffering. People couldn't handle the gravity of the man he had become through the crucible of that caregiving, so they tried to erase it.
They treated him like a lost boy who just needed a hug and a distraction, rather than a widower who had just survived the collapse of his universe.
Exactly.
So left entirely alone after these brutal back-to-back losses of his mother and his wife, the author is searching for a framework. He needs a way to explain why reality feels so fundamentally, structurally rigged against his maturity.
Why does the world constantly try to erase his adulthood?
Right, and he finds his answer in the most unexpected place possible: quantum physics.
This is where his synthesis of ideas reaches its absolute peak. He dives deep into quantum mechanics to explain his sociological and personal isolation.
It's quite the pivot.
It is. The sources show him grappling with John Wheeler's concept of the participatory universe, Cubism, which stands for quantum Bayesianism, the many worlds interpretation, and idealist interpretations of physics.
Okay, we need to slow down and translate this, because connecting the tragic death of a spouse to quantum wave functions is a massive counterintuitive leap. Let's start with John Wheeler and the participatory universe. What is the actual mechanism there?
So in classical physics, the universe is a stage, and we are just passive audience members watching the play. But Wheeler, a theoretical physicist, argued that observers are not passive witnesses.
Based on the double slit experiment, right?
Exactly. Based on quantum experiments like the double slit experiment, he argued that observers bring the universe into being through the act of measurement. Reality isn't just sitting out there waiting to be looked at. It is co-created by the observer interacting with it.
So the act of looking at a photon actually changes how the photon behaves. But how does he get to cubism from there? And let's define that, because cubism relies on Bayesian inference, and I really want to make sure we aren't losing anyone in the math.
Absolutely. So Bayesian inference is a statistical method for updating probabilities as you get new information. Think of it like playing poker.
Okay, poker.
Before any cards are dealt, you have a baseline belief about your chances of winning. But as the dealer flips cards over, the flop, the turn, the river, you constantly update your internal probability of winning based on that new data. Your belief changes as reality reveals itself.
Okay, so you are constantly calculating the odds based on what you observe in real time. How does that apply to quantum mechanics?
Cubism, quantum Bayesianism, takes that poker logic and applies it to physics. It suggests that the quantum wave function, the mathematical state of particles, is not an objective physical thing out in the world.
Wait, it's not real.
Instead, it is simply an agent's personal degree of belief, updated via Bayesian inference, about what they will experience next. Reality is participatory because every measurement is an action taken from a specific personal perspective.
So it's entirely subjective.
Cubism argues there is no God's eye view of the universe. There are only individual agents updating their beliefs based on their interactions.
Okay, so if he's reading Wheeler and Cubism, he's latching onto the idea that the universe doesn't exist independently of his observation of it. But it feels like an enormous leap to go from updating the probability of a photon in a lab to a 57-year-old man walking into a grocery store and feeling socially isolated.
It is a massive leap.
How is he making that jump?
He takes the core mechanism of cubism, that reality is updated via an agent's personal beliefs and actions, and applies it directly to sociological structures. In his view, the rest of society is operating on a shared set of beliefs that maintains a comfortable superposition of arrested development.
A superposition meaning a state where all possibilities exist at once and nothing is finalized.
Exactly. Society exists in a state where no one has to grow up, no one takes final responsibility, everyone gets to be a perpetual teenager. That is the consensus reality the culture has built, but the author, through his suffering and his caregiving, has stepped outside of that consensus.
So when he walks into a room, his sheer presence is a threat.
Yes, because if observation changes reality, his refusal to remain an infantilized child threatens to collapse that cultural superposition.
He forces a measurement.
Precisely. His insistence on maturity, his carrying the weight of actual life or death responsibility, forces the people around him to confront the reality they are avoiding. He threatens the existing order simply by observing it through the lens of an adult.
It's almost like realizing you are an actor in a play where everyone else on stage is improvising a really lighthearted, goofy comedy. But you refuse to break character from a very serious, heavy, dramatic tragedy.
That's a great way to look at it.
By holding your ground, by refusing to deliver the punchlines or smile at the jokes, you force the entire stage, all the other actors, to adapt to your reality. You ruin their comfortable comedy just by existing on the stage and taking it seriously.
That is the perfect analogy. He is the dramatic actor ruining the cultural comedy. But it raises a critical, uncomfortable question about his mindset. Is this just cosmic arrogance? Is he simply projecting his immense trauma onto the universe, believing the very laws of physics were designed just to humiliate him?
He actually addresses that directly in the text, which surprised me. He knows how it sounds. He says it seems infinitely more arrogant to believe the universe was created with a specific intent to humiliate him than to believe he is simply projecting his resentment onto the universe.
Yes, the sources show a man grappling with his own potential solipsism. But he clarifies the difference between arrogance and profound insight. The quantum ideas do not support a cosmic conspiracy against him personally, but they do support the idea that reality requires participation.
Meaning you have to act.
Exactly. Translated out of physics and into his life, adulthood is not a certificate others hand you. It is not something society grants you as a favor. It is something brought into being by the repeated costly act of assuming it, of forcing your measurement onto the world.
And because society burned down the school in 1968, he refuses to wait for that certificate from a culture he believes is incapable of granting it anyway.
Which leads to a really haunting thought experiment he describes in the sources.
Yeah.
He imagines a scenario where some virus wipes out everyone under the age of 60, and he miraculously lives to be 140 years old.
Okay.
But instead of the remaining society respecting his extreme age and wisdom, they continue to pass laws specifically designed to humiliate him, treating him as still young forever, passing legislation to infantilize anyone born after 1960.
Like society saying, oops, too late to repeal the youth laws now, just to mess with him for 100 years.
It's a dark, absurdist parable, but it's a prophetic protest against being erased. It visualizes his deepest fear, that no matter how much he suffers, no matter how much responsibility he carries, no matter how old he physically gets, the cultural matrix will always refuse to acknowledge his adulthood.
So if reality is participatory, as these quantum theories suggest, how does one actively choose a better branch of existence? If you feel stuck on the worst possible timeline in a universe governed by a hippie prison guard god, how do you jump to a new reality?
You have to rewrite the code.
Right. For the author, the answer came through a radical, and I mean radical, rethinking of theology.
This represents the final major shift in his worldview. To understand it, we really have to look at his religious history. For 20 years, from 1998 to roughly 2018, he was a staunch atheist.
And his atheism was originally sparked by a brutal breakup with a woman, right?
Yes, a woman named Dee.
The breakup felt to him like his hard-earned adulthood was being arbitrarily revoked, ripped away, and thrown out.
Exactly. He associated belief in God with the hippie prison guard deity we discussed. A god who demanded degrading labor, offered no recognition, and rewarded those who abandoned him. Why worship the prison guard?
But just weeks before Don's sudden death, his perspective shifted. He mentions being heavily influenced by listening to Jordan Peterson on podcasts, specifically Peterson's psychological concept of acting as if God exists.
That as if framework was the skeleton key for him. It provided a pragmatic, almost clinical approach to faith. You don't need to believe in a literal bearded man in the clouds. You just need to align your actions, your internal orientation, with the highest possible good.
You act as if the universe has a moral structure.
And by doing so, you participate in creating that structure.
He takes this as his concept, and he completely rewrites the book of Genesis. And this is where the physics, the philosophy, and the theology all violently crash into each other. He replaces the traditional Santa God figure with what he calls the perfect being.
And he incorporates actual cosmology into the biblical text. He frames creation not as a magic trick with a magic wand, but as the moment of the primeval atom and the introduction of the Higgs field.
Wait, he is using the Higgs field, the mechanism in particle physics that gives fundamental particles their mass, to rewrite Genesis.
Yes. He paraphrases Genesis 1.1 as a power greater than a neutron, creating the ability to be more than a neutron. In his view, before creation, everything was just massless, consequence-free energy moving at the speed of light. A physical state he equates with the irresponsible, consequence-free existence of the hippies.
Oh, wow.
Creation, through the Higgs field, is the granting of mass, of stability, of friction. It is the granting of the potential for conscious agents to choose to have weight, to have consequence.
Okay, so mass equals consequence. And he completely redefines heaven, too. It's no longer a retirement center in the clouds with harps. He calls it the maximum desirable outcome.
This is a staggering intellectual move. In his rewritten Quantum Genesis, the Garden of Eden is the state of perfect alignment with that maximum desirable outcome. The fall of man isn't about eating a literal apple because a snake talked to you. It is the moment conscious agents chose a misaligned perceptual branch of reality.
So sin is just misalignment.
Exactly. And the curse of degrading labor, the engine room of the cruise ship we talked about, isn't a petty punishment from a vindictive God. It's just the unavoidable mathematical physics of a fractured, misaligned reality.
I see the logic, but this completely flips his old grievance on its head. He used to be absolutely furious that God demanded degrading labor from him while rewarding elites with excess. But now he introduces kenosis, the theological concept of the self-emptying of Jesus on the cross, as the ultimate hack to the system.
If we look at the underlying mechanism here, kenosis solves his entire existential crisis. He views Jesus not just as a religious savior in the traditional sense, but as the ultimate conscious agent who put himself through the most suffering for the least sin. Jesus voluntarily absorbs the physics of the fracture.
It's almost like a lightning rod. The lightning, the suffering, the systemic unfairness, the humiliation of biology, it is going to strike regardless. It's just the weather of a fractured universe.
Right.
But kenosis is him choosing to be the rod, grounding that destructive energy voluntarily so it doesn't bring the house down. He takes the hit to protect the structure.
That is exactly it. He absorbs the damage. And by acting as if this kenotic reality is true, the author makes a participatory quantum choice. He chooses the perceptual branch of the multiverse that heals the fracture.
He steps up.
By taking on the immense suffering of caring for Dawn and bearing the grief of her death without collapsing into nihilism, he acts as the lightning rod. He regains his autonomy, his adulthood, without ever needing the world's permission. He claims his adulthood through voluntary, sacrificial alignment with the maximum desirable outcome.
There is this incredibly poignant contrast near the very end of the sources that brings all of this together. About a month before his mother died of C. diff, she called him from the hospital. She was terrified, and she wanted to talk to him about heaven and hell. She was deeply worried about his soul because of his years of vocal atheism.
And his reaction at the time was annoyance. He felt she was trying to pull him back into a subservient Eden, back into the worldview, where he was just a dependent child who needed saving from the God he still viewed as a hippie prison guard.
He explicitly states in his writings that he could not worship a God who would crucify his sons with labor, but pedestalize his daughters with biological privilege.
But his new quantum theological understanding changes everything about how he views that conversation in hindsight. He realizes that the traditional Garden of Eden, the place of pure comfort, no struggle, no friction, no responsibility, is actually hell for a man who desperately needs purpose and weight.
Precisely. His mother wanted peace and rest for him. But peace and rest are the realm of the massless energy, the realm of the child. He had found his paradise in the heavy crucible of caregiving.
Dawn was a burden, yes, a massive physical and emotional burden, but a burden that loved him, validated his agency, and gave him undeniable consequence in the universe.
He was in paradise precisely because he had a challenge worthy of an adult.
Wow. Okay, what an incredible, harrowing journey this has been to unpack. We have traced this man's path from the cultural betrayals he felt in 1968 through the raw, visceral humiliation of his childhood and his antinatalist rebellion.
We followed his search for dignity through the socioeconomic engine room of modern America, into the profound, transformative crucible of caregiving for the woman he loved.
And finally, out into this wild, quantum, participatory theology, where adulthood is no longer a certificate you wait for society to hand you, but a reality you actively claim through voluntary sacrifice and kenosis.
It is a testament to the human mind's desperate, brilliant need to find order, weight, and meaning in the face of compounding tragedies and systemic indifference.
So let's bring this back to you listening right now. We all face systemic pressures. We all interact with an economy and a culture that often asks us to conform, to stay quiet, to remain in a state of extended adolescence or comfortable, mindless consumption.
But autonomy, true, recognized adulthood, requires the costly, solitary act of forcing your own branch of reality. It requires stepping out of the comfortable superposition and making a definitive participatory choice to carry a burden.
Look at your own life. What parts of your adulthood were simply handed to you by the cultural script? And what parts did you have to actively wrest into existence through your own suffering, your own caregiving, your own absolute refusal to be infantilized by the people around you?
If reality truly is participatory, if your observations and your choices help collapse the wave function of your universe, what maximum desirable outcome are you observing into existence right now?
Are you waiting for the jagged white line on the X-ray to tell you what's broken in your life? Or are you ready to step into the muddy waters, become the lightning rod, and force your own healing?
Something to think about
Until next
next time.